spilling their books like the first day of school.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there will be a quiz at the end.
There will be.
Did someone say I like quizzes?
Who said that? Now we're all getting a quiz.
Why are you sitting in the back? Shouldn't? Right. Okay. Of course. Yeah.
Oh, you were that kid in
Yeah.
school. Teacher, and you're gonna ask us about the homework assignment? Yeah, pretty much. What's the full name of the channel? I need you to pull it up.
Building Better Worlds, the Sorcery of something. It took 6 months and thousands of hours.
Yeah.
A lot. Yeah. And because I'm crazy, I wanted things like
Oh, we did. We got one left.
inner elbow, armor. What suit of armor has this bullshit? Only mine, right? Only the shit I'm cooking in. Oh, I can't cuss.
Yeah, it's the Hilton. It's Saturday night. Okay, guys, hi. How's everyone doing? Hi. We're so happy you're here. This is, I don't know, something, building better world, sorcery of world building.
Something like that.
Something. There were a lot of words in our title. We thought the more words there were, the cooler it would sound. And you're all here, so it obviously worked. Yeah. I'm Rachel Rener. I'm a fantasy author. I'm best known for my Gilded Blood series. I've written, 15 books to date. I love blurring the line between magic and science. I'm super thrilled to be here talking about world building. This is my brother, Joey.
I'm Joey. I have never met this woman in my life. Thank you, whoever said hi. Hello. I am a lifelong dungeon master. I have been DMing weekly, sometimes twice a week campaigns for 15 years. I have posters lining my dining room of our campaigns of art that I've commissioned. We get really into Dungeons and Dragons. I even ran a...
You can come in. I thought you were cute.
You scared them off.
I'm sorry. Subtle. Someone get their number for me. Okay.
I don't know what I was talking about. Oh, I ran a Dnd Podcast for a while called Of Dice and Friends.
I was a voice actor, Tana the Tiefling.
She was there too. I'm currently working on writing the story and programming a video game called Into the Maw. And I guess we're here to talk about building worlds.
Yeah,
world building.
Worlds. Well, one thing very important first. I'm moderating a few panels. I don't like it when the rooms next to us sound like they're having more fun than us. I don't like it when people don't come to my panel. So on the count of three, we're all at the top of our lungs. It's okay. I love the enthusiasm. Count of three, top of your lungs, boobs. 1, 2, 3. Now everyone knows we're here. And they wishes they were too. All right. Joe, you want to kick us off?
You want me to start this?
Yeah, man. We're here to talk about world building. Well, actually, I do have one more question.
Yeah.
How many of you are current DMs? Okay.
Cool.
How many of you are aspiring DMs? How many of you are writers? Hey, how many of you are I should say, let's do published and aspiring. How many of you are published writers? Oh, cool. So the rest of you are aspiring writers, right?
Every single one.
Look at it. Cool. Okay. Well, let's talk about world building.
What is world building? I don't know.
World building, in pure simplistic terms, it's the place where your characters become immersed and where your readers hopefully will become immersed too.
Right. Characters are important, but no one talks about the characters of fantasy stories, right? Everyone talks about the world and how well they can get into that setting. I think Harry Potter is a great example of this. No one cares about Harry Potter, but they care about Hogwarts. And I see you wearing, was that Hufflepuff, right? Because Slytherin's green.
Sorry, I always go towards evil, so it's fine.
Point is we we like to see ourselves in the worlds that we read, and that's why D&D is so important, right? We want to be a part of those worlds. So it turns out that world building is kind of important, both from my side of the field with role-playing games and with fantasy writing.
So we're going to talk about the dichotomy of that quite a bit. You'll hear some things from like the fantasy writing aspect of it, and then you'll hear some things from the dungeon master side of it, because there's a whole lot of overlap and then a whole lot of like we do things a little bit differently. So magic is a big part of world building, right? We get the setting, we get the mood, but magic is also a really big part of that. And Joey and I were talking about that, right? We had the discussion of sort of which comes first.
Right. Yeah. So do you want me to answer?
Yeah,
this?
go.
I guess someone had the idea to just put us on a panel, so we're just gonna talk to each other and to you guys about this.
You guys are also welcome to. I mean, we'll do questions at the end, but if you have like a super burning question and you're kind of like me and you're a squirrel and you're like, I'm not going to remember this, like we can take some questions.
If you think something she says is really dumb, feel free to interrupt. Al.
You're my partner.
I'm very sensitive. Okay, so the discussion of magic for me is really interesting because for D&D, I don't really get a say in that, right? Dungeons and Dragons has all of these rules, lots. Well, I missed it. Oh,
he said, "Sure you do."
Yeah.
To which I went,
"Yeah, I'll get to that." Right, but like the rules of magic are literally written for you, right? So the trick comes from how that applies to the world, right? You, as the DM, get to affect where that magic comes from. And I imagine, obviously, that's a big part of fantasy writing, but you have a lot more freedom when it comes to how magic works.
Yeah, I didn't have anybody write, 1E, 2E, 3E, 4E Pathfinder, right, to tell me how I can do my magic. So when I'm getting ready to write a book, I actually usually start with the magic system or a character. It kind of depends on which series, but either I'll say to myself, this is the kind of character I really want to build this world around. But in most cases, I say to myself, okay, this is the kind of magic I want to work with. And that's how I kind of start my stories. So like I had my most recent series, Gilded Blood, I was reading an article about RH Null blood. Have any of you heard of this? Okay, cool. I'm going to tell you something really cool. It's going to blow your mind. So we all know of like different blood types, O positive, O negative, B positive, B negative, and so on, right? There's a blood type called RH Null where you have no antigens whatsoever. And it's called gold blood, like kind of as a tongue-in-cheek thing, because you can donate your blood to literally anyone and you can't get blood from anyone else. So if you have an emergency, you better hope that one of the other 72 people in the world with RH Null blood
is only 70.
No, it's like literally, it's like less than 100 people. So I thought to myself, like, what if I created a magic system based on like gold blood and having it unlock magic? And then I broke that down into, well, what if like this blood type could create and this blood type could, bestow like certain types of powers, and you had to work together in pairs. So that's kind of how I came up with it. And because we're working with blood, obviously we have to go into like tattoo magic and how like magic ink interacts with like blood types, right? So like I got to do whatever I want.
I don't get to do that.
You don't get to do that.
I mean, you can a little bit with villains and things that are out of the player's control, right? You can cheat and tell them to shut up when they say, hey, that's not in the rules. But, generally speaking, the magic systems in D&D are there. That's so cool. I can't really do that. And as players, you can't really do that either. I mean, you can make stuff up around the rules, but you have the core built for you. So you start with the magic system.
I really do. I mean, I love magic is my bread and butter. It's why I love fantasy. I mean, like all genres are fun to read, right? Like I was that kid with a flashlight staying up late in bed. But I mean, like you can have love, you can have angst, you can have all that stuff, but throw in magic, man. To me, it just doesn't get any better than that.
Right.
Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. That's part of why I love D&D so much.
Yeah.
Well, just fantasy in general, right?
Yeah.
I like to start with religion when I build a setting. I like to start at the beginning with the creation myth of where did this world come from? And that single question, once I answer that, spawns a whole network of other things. Like, well, what are you have a question?
So because I'll probably forget this question.
No, please.
40 minutes.
Yeah, of course.
And you brought up religion.
Yeah.
In your D&D world, how do you deal with the effects of like deities and like, well, if there's a problem, why don't the deities?
Oh, I love this question.
I'm going to restate it just so people watching the stream. So how do you deal with the effects of the deities, right? And
if there's an issue, why don't the gods solve it?
Yeah.
That's such a good question. I think there are a few ways to handle this. The one that most pre-written D&D modules do is, in my opinion, the laziest, which is the gods are there, they're just busy, whatever. To me, that's really boring. That's not world building. That's kind of the opposite of that.
In the last campaign that we did, Joey had 10 different like deities. One of them, we literally were standing inside its dead husk. I mean, it was cool. It was really cool. We had a whole scene inside of like its rib cage.
Yeah.
Right.
So, which is the first answer, which is the gods are dead. Something has happened. They've either abandoned mortal kind, or they've been killed by something, maybe the villain, or they've left to seed other worlds. For whatever reason, they're absent. I think that's cool. I think that can be really interesting when played right. I think the other answer is the gods are around, but well, there are a lot of ways to skin this cat, right? But I mean, just to list a few, they're around, but they have lost their power in creating mortals, and so they just don't have the juice that they used to. Or maybe the gods.
Hey, they make a pill for that. Come on.
or the gods are the villains themselves. Maybe the gods are at war with one another and they are participating. Personally, I like when the players interact with gods to do whatever it is they're trying to do. When the gods are helping the players, that makes the players feel important and at the core of things. And I love that. And I think the coolest way to handle religion in stories is where the gods are real. Because how cool is that? How cool is it to walk among your creators? To me, that's a really exciting thing we get to explore in fantasy that we don't really get to explore here, right? There are a lot of ways to handle that. And part of that is, well, the creation myth. Why did the gods create mortals? Maybe they don't even care anymore.
Yeah, I like that.
Maybe
like,
they're apathetic. Yeah.
Not just here's the magic system, but where was that magic birthed?
Right.
That's a great. I think that's a great.
Right. Like I said, we don't get to write the rules for magic, but we can write the origin, where it came from, how the gods created it, why they created it, how it all works. I think I've rambled on long enough about this, but the creation myth can lead to a lot of other things: magic, gods, or early cultures, you name it. I think that's a great place to start.
Do you play around with the concept of creation myth? Like, it's been kind of twisted over the years.
The question is, do you play around with the creation myth and how it's
how
twisted
honest
over the years?
is it? Right.
Yeah.
I think that's a really fun way to do it. It's a bit difficult if the gods are still around, because if they're around, right, like, you know, clerics probably know the actual details, but I do think that's fun. And the gods themselves might not be terribly honest about what happened. Is that something you've been playing with?
I mean, our players are starting to figure stuff out.
Great.
The gods will. I totally did not steal this from real time. Like every 1,000 years, the world breaks and reforms.
Nah.
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a Z.
It's totally OC. And
Yeah, of course.
but over the different phases of the world.
That's cool. That's cool.
The gods were manifest as into a human that they choose. It's their avatar.
That's awesome. I think that's a good segue into like the religion and how like races are part of that, and how like magic and race go into the world building.
So she writes urban fantasy. So that's what fantasy that takes place here on Earth.
Yeah,
Right?
I mean, urban fantasy typically is here more or less in this time. So in that sense, I can be kind of lazy, right? But I will say, I did get to do one where they stepped through an interdimensional filing cabinet and ended up in the Fey realm,
It's a
and
big
like
filing cabinet.
big filing cabinet, right? Actually, no, it was sort of like a plug your nose and like
Dive in.
step inside. Yeah, it was cool, and it was really fun to be able to make up like different creatures, because you always see the same Fae, right? You see fairies, you see elves, you see vampires. Like, that's cool. But I got to go into some like Scottish folklore, things like that. I looked up, there's a monster called a Fachan. Have any of you guys ever heard of this? Fachan?
Oh.
Oh, you've heard of a Fachan? All right, that's cool. So 12 feet tall, one leg, one arm,
Wait.
one eye, no neck. And it literally just like hops around, and it has like this spiked, club that's been dipped in poison. That was cool to put into an urban fantasy, right? I was also reading about Gleistigs. Anyone hear of that?
Are you making this up?
I am, but if you could stop calling me out on it, that'd be awesome.
Sorry.
No, so Gleistigs are they're really beautiful, beautiful women. And they want you to dance with them, because that's what beautiful women want you to do, right?
Is that how
And
that
they
works?
wear beautiful dresses, and they're absolutely enchanting, and they just love men. But if you accidentally catch sight of their hooves that they're hiding underneath their long dress, you're gonna die. So kind of up to you if that's what you're into, right? Oh yeah, right, exactly. So yeah, my pitfall as a writer, because I have all the freedom in the world, is making sure I haven't done what's been done before. Also, they're having way too much fun, so we're gonna do it again, you guys, even louder than before. 1,
Oops.
2, 3. Thank you, newcomer. So appreciate it. Rock on. I know. I was really impressed. I was like almost psychic. Maybe you just had boobs on the brain. Yeah. So that's where I, as a fantasy author, can really stumble. Is this has been done a million times before, and it's going to be done a million times more. What can I do to keep it fresh? Where I do a totally different take on vampires, and it's not what we've seen a million times before. Right?
You're gonna really love this. I don't get that choice.
No, you don't.
Again, I mean, everything I say is an asterisk, because as DM, you're in full control, right? But there is some expectation of rules, and people come into a campaign, and there is a list of a bajillion races in D&D that are expected to be there. And you can pick and choose when you're creating your world, right? The creation myth, we get to pick which gods created who and why, but still, my hands are a little bit tied with races. With some small tweaks, we can change a few details. We can, I say a hand in the back, very back corner?
Repeat the last part again. Yeah, that could be something we can do. If you guys have a question, come on up to the mic and we'll just call on you after we finish our thought. But yeah, just repeat the last part, please.
I'm not even going to finish my thought.
He's like, that's what you get.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
No, I was just wondering if you've ever worked with or wanted to work with systems other than D&D.
Yeah. So I'm talking about D&D because it's the most common, but I've run campaigns in Pathfinder, first edition, second
We're gonna
edition.
talk about that at the end a little bit. We'll get
There
to
are
that
a lot.
for sure.
Vampire the Masquerade, Shadowrun. I have done it all. Well, not all of it. There's a lot, but I've done a lot.
Yeah.
Thank
you. Thanks for that.
So when I say D&D, really I mean tabletop RPGs. There are rules written because it's a game. There's role playing, but it's still a game. You don't just get to create a story, and you shouldn't be, because your players are your main characters, right? What were we talking
We
about?
were talking about how we fit like the different races and how the magic, how the races use the magic, and how we build that into the larger world building construct.
Right. So sometimes it's fun to, like I said, you get to pick your races and tweak them a little bit. Like the common one is tiefling are attuned to chaos, right? That's a really fun trope to play with, and everyone seems to love it. So you can kind of give more context for that, or you can make something completely up. Like the elves they cannot lie. It's impossible for them to lie, which comes from, Fey mythology. So you do get some freedom, but depending on your players, there's only so much you can do or should do.
What do you do? Like, I mean, is it possible in D&D? And like, even though I did a campaign, I'm actually a pretty big noob when it comes to like tabletop games. So what do you do? Like if I said to you, okay, Joey, I'm going to join your campaign and I want to be a tentacle monster because I was just in Japan and got a lot of reading done and it's on my mind. Like what? Hey, don't yuck my yum. Like what would you do?
Okay.
Now I'm thinking about that as like part of a D&D campaign and I need to like
Intent is important.
okay.
If you come in with this idea of a tentacle monster because you just want to throw the campaign out the window,
I really
But-
truly I want to play a tentacle monster.
then
So
the
like
answer should always be yes.
but how would we do that in the construct of D&D world
You figure it out.
building?
Yeah.
You figure it out, yeah.
So
Would I choose like the closest character type to it?
I see what you're saying.
Right? Like
Yeah.
how would I do that if I wanted to like keep the specs and listen
Luckily-
to all your little rules?
Luckily, there are like 70 different official races or something. So often you can find something similar.
Okay. Yeah, just
And
tweak it.
if not, that's a discussion you and the DM, in this case me, would have where we build a hopefully fair and balanced version, because you don't want any of your players outshining the others, right? There's no main character in D&D like there is in fantasy writing.
I have main characters.
Yeah, okay, well, there
Shit.
should be.
That does remind me of Kriv, my emotional support tentacle monster.
D&D gets weird, guys.
D&D gets weird.
As it should.
Yeah.
That's the best part.
Yeah, come on up here. I only bite a little bit, and most people say they like it.
I like your venom tongue. Horrifying. Especially with it coming out of your throat.
Yeah, would you please turn around so everyone can see now? It reminds me of Kriv, my emotional support tentacle monster. Said with love.
Yeah.
Okay, so we find the closest
most-
race archetype, and then
Yeah,
just
and
kind
you
of like
make it work.
squish it
And
in.
you jiggle some things. Something I think when world building for D&D, my best advice is to do it with your players. Again, and I can't stress this enough, your players are your main characters. So they need to feel welcome and correct in this setting. So if a player says, yeah, I want to play a tentacle monster, it's everything I've ever dreamed of. You know what? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll make it work.
You touched earlier on like tropes that we love, right?
Yeah.
Like we love chaotic tiefling. We love
Obnoxious elves.
yeah, and paladins who are just like
Yeah.
right? Like righteous. So yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. We love horny bards. So let's talk about like archetype versus trope versus cliche, and when and why you can get away with them.
Is there a difference between those
Yeah,
three?
there is.
Will you tell
So,
us?
Absolutely.
Not me, them. Will you tell us?
I just got to grab something outside.
Oh,
Real quick. I'll be right back. No, an archetype is like a class or a box that something can fit in, right? Like you do have archetypes of like different characters and the characteristics that they have with them. Tropes are more theme based, right? So, I mean, I write a lot of my books are romantasy, so a lot of the tropes I know off the top of my head are kind of romance based, like one bed, right? You have two people, they hate each other, they get to the hotel. Oh no, there's only one bed. This is a trope, right? But it is a trope because people love it.
We read very different books.
There were so many tentacles in that one bed. Okay, so full of it. I swear I don't read tentacle porn, but if I did, you couldn't yuck it. But then we have like the chosen one, right? We have archetypes that become tropes in and of themselves because they're so beloved that we see them over and over again. The problem is when those tropes become cliche. And sometimes you can even get away with cliche. And I think, you know, we can kind of talk about this more, but like in D&D, I think cliche is almost nostalgic, right?
Absolutely.
The chaotic tiefling is cliche. But how much fun is it to play, right?
I think that's the difference. When reading a book,
Because the second part is like, when can you get away with it and when should you not try?
right. So the example of the world being destroyed on a cycle, which was brought up, right? If I read a book and that's how it opened, I'd be like, ugh, again with this.
Didn't that one guy do that?
Like, and that other guy and the other. But in D&D, it's something familiar, and your players get to enjoy being a part of that cliche.
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's no longer a cliche. It's exciting. It's ooh, yeah. I get to experience being a part of this thing that I've read about a million times. But you don't get to do that, right?
No. You know, just to kind of like hover on that for a little bit longer. I mean, like football fans. Football doesn't really change, right? And yet every year, whenever the sport starts, I'm not really into sports. Every year, whatever month the sport starts, there's a feeling of nostalgia. Why are you giving me a dirty look?
I love CFB.
I'm so happy for you. I hope it loves you back. There's a nostalgia. There's a fun. There's also too, like, how do you like rewatching movies because you know exactly what's going to happen and it's a comfort, right? My husband and I have this argument every night where he's like, it's 11:30 at night. Let's start this brand new movie that you've never heard of or seen before. And this show that might have lots of violence and scary things that you have to go to sleep 10 minutes later. And I'm like, what is wrong with you? Let's just put on that one movie. Let's put on Spaceballs. And he's like, bitch. No, he never says that. He's like my beloved, darling wife, whom I wouldn't trade for anyone on the planet, even Scarlett Johansson.
Is that what he addresses you?
He likes brunettes,
Okay.
but anyway.
He's intimidated by how you can't.
I've got a great shorts. He's like, we've watched it so many times, but I get a comfort. When I put on a movie, I want to know that I'm going to love it. And I think that that's something you can definitely get away with more in D&D. Nay, is almost welcomed to an extent.
To an extent. I mean, there's certainly a point where you still want some nuance, right? But as DM, hopefully you know your audience, which is a really cool tool at our disposal. We know who we're writing for.
Are you raising your hands or becoming one with the universe? I can't quite tell. We have a this going on. Okay. I hope you find the attunement that you're looking for. Remember, if you have questions, coming up
We
to
have
the
a real
microphone.
life
We're happy to
monk
ask.
back
I
there.
know, right?
As DMs, we get to write for. We know exactly who we're writing for, which is super cool.
So, are you saying that, like, can you get away with some cliches based on the people you're playing with?
Oh, of course, yeah.
What if you don't know the people you're playing with? How do you know if you've taken cliche too far or if it's going to be welcome like Spaceballs should always be?
It's hard, right? If you're building a new setting for a brand new group you've never played with, the important part is that episode 0, right? Where you all sit down around a table and you say, this is my plan. What do you guys think? What's your plan? What is it that you want out of this campaign? Which is awesome, right? Everyone's on the same page and we have a fucking great time telling a story together.
We're not supposed to say
I'm
that
so
till
sorry.
after 10 o'clock.
Scratch that from the record.
You're scratching that, right? He's shaking his head now. Oh no, we're live.
The feds will be arresting me right after this.
He's hiding more than his no underwear underneath that costume. Anyway.
You don't get.
Oh, great. Hilton is rated R. Fantastic.
You don't get to do that. You have no idea who's reading your book. I mean, you have a target audience, right? But
yeah, and I'd love to hear your question before I get into that. Go ahead.
It's actually building on some of what you're mentioning, like the fact that as a DM, you know your audience, but you don't.
No.
Or like as a DM, you know, we get to build the world with our players. Whereas if you're writing, most of the time it's more of a solitary activity and you're, you know, creating the story on your own. So I was wondering about other kinds of like, you know, if you were DMing and you were an aspiring author, what are some things that would be challenges? Because, you know, like for example, suddenly you have to start thinking of like an imaginary audience of people that you don't know, or you know, now you're like feeling like, oh, I have to create everything on my own, whereas before it was more collaborative, or things like that.
So are you saying like if you're a DM with hopes to eventually turn that campaign into a book?
Not necessarily that campaign. If you just want to write, like they're both creative activities, but they're very different. So what are some challenges? Maybe you could answer this more. About being a writer, specifically.
How do I make sure my shit isn't cliche, basically?
Well, and how do you write for an audience when you're used to knowing your audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. And you're welcome to take a seat too. It's a hard floor.
I have a lot of respect for writers for this reason. I get to cheat and tell the story collaboratively. You don't get to do that.
No, I
That
don't.
sucks.
I don't. Yeah, I think for writers, it is a little bit harder to decide what's a trope, what's an archetype. Can I keep pushing this? And I think our biggest thing is like I said, vampires have been written a million times before. They'll be written a million times again. And you have to ask yourself, what can I do that hasn't been done before? What can I show that hasn't been seen before, at least to the best of my ability? Well, if you don't read other books in your genre, you're not going to know. So one of the best things you can do as a writer is to read liberally as much as you can across the board. Because I tell you what, my first series, it's my baby. I love it. But it was trite as fuck. Like, I hadn't been reading up on like a lot of fantasy lately. Like, I read fantasy like crazy when I was a kid. Ella Enchanted and Goosebumps and Animorphs. Like, you feel me? Like, that stuff was awesome. I knew not to write that. But I wanted elemental magic. And like, yes, I put a scientific spin on it. I did make sure that my magic system was different from what I had seen before. I didn't want to do an Avatar The Last Airbender. Electromancers, for example, don't just pull lightning from the sky. They can actually affect other people's brains and hearts, God bless you, because our bodies run on electricity, right? So if you get an electromancer who's very powerful and has very attuned control, like they could stop a heart. That's cool. But I had a character who was a little two-dimensional, right? I had a chosen one main character who was reluctant, but we've seen that before. And while I still love that series, I've read a lot more since then, and I know what I could do to take some of the triteness out of it.
So you fail a little bit before you find
If you're an aspiring writer, like, I just want you to know that in 10 years time, you're going to look back on that first book or that first series and you're going to say, and if you don't, I got news for you. And that's okay. And that's okay. Because the more you read, the better you write. And the better and more you write, the better you get. So, I mean, that's definitely just to become, I guess that's the only way I can say is 2 things. 1, read as much as you can to make sure that you're not just regurgitating something that's been done before. And if you are regurgitating, put a fresh spin on it.
I want to real quick. You mentioned lightning magic. My favorite archetype to play is a storm sorcerer.
I love lightning magic.
Again, in D&D, super cool. But if you're reading a fantasy story with that, it's like, oh, okay, I've seen this before.
Which is why magic systems in that sense work really well, right? Like, I am actually still very, very proud of that magic system, even though I fell into a couple of cliches, pitfalls. I have not read, and that doesn't mean it's not out there. I know it's out there. Please don't at me, okay? I have not read about electromancers who can affect electromagnetic fields and empathy and things like that. So, like, I think that's pretty cool. Can you do that in D&D? Like, if you're doing like a storm, oh, cool. There you go. If any of you love that.
The spell Synaptic Static does that. It's great.
That's
Yep.
amazing. Yeah, come on up.
Hello.
Hello.
I kind of have a question going off of like when you're reading and digesting all of this new material to make sure that you're moving into something more original.
Mm-hmm.
As DMs, we borrow. Everybody
You
says
mean-
we steal.
you mean
No,
we
no, we
steal?
borrow.
Oh, yeah.
We borrow. At what point is it no longer borrowing and are you just taking it? Or how do you take those bits of inspiration without leaning too heavily on the original source material?
I think it only becomes stealing if your players know about it.
You're
Um,
right.
That's the DM answer.
Yeah, right. For DM,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
for D&D. If it's not bothering your players, you're good.
You're not monetizing off of it.
Right. No.
Right? That's a big difference. You're not commercializing it. You're not monetizing it. Your players already know you're full of shit. You're in your
Exactly.
mother's basement. No one cares.
Here's the problem, right? When you start streaming it, like I said, I
Right.
DM'd a stream for a couple years, and it was a lot harder because suddenly it was like, oh wait, this very obvious thing from League of Legends or whatever, I can't use it. Someone will call me out on it,
As they
And so-
should.
as they should, right? And so I had to suddenly flex a lot more creative muscles, and I actually enjoyed that more. I felt like the story I wrote was more complete, more unique, which was
Yeah.
nice. But ultimately, if you're not streaming and you're just writing for your friends, just write it for your friends.
Yeah.
If they're happy, then you're happy.
Yeah. And I think, when you start commercializing, I mean, this is my full-time job, right? Once you start commercializing it and taking money from people and you're out
Taking
in
money
the
from people.
I take so much money from people and you're out in the public sphere, right? I kind of look at it like if you're a painter and you want to paint a peacock, peacocks are lovely.
They are.
I don't have an eidetic memory, right? If I wanted to sit down and paint a peacock, I would probably have to look. How many times am I going to say cock tonight? I would have to look. I would have to look at so many of those peacocks. And I would have to take different reference files, right? I'm sorry, it's really only now just hitting me how funny of a word peacock is. I would have to look at a lot of different references. And I would say, you know what? Actually, I'm not going to use peacock as much as I love saying that word. Let's talk mermaids, right? I want to paint a mermaid. I want to paint the most beautiful mermaid you have ever seen in your entire life. Some mermaids have gills. Some don't have gills. Some have webbed fingers. Some don't have webbed fingers. Some have long, flowing, billowing fishtails. Some have so I would probably look at 100 different pictures and then take a tiny bit from each one.
So
and
you're
then,
an AI art generator.
yeah, we're not going to touch that. We're not going to touch that. I knew you were going to do that. We're not going to touch that. And then I would spit out my own totally 100% original Rachel Rener mermaid. It's a little bit like that when you write. You can't stop yourself. It's even subconscious. A book you read 15 years ago that just lingered with you.
Someone has said, and I wish I knew who, someone said that there are no original ideas left.
Yeah.
And it probably, and that's
All the way
scary.
back then he said that?
Yes. Wow.
Wow.
So there have, if it was Shakespeare, there have been a few new ideas since Shakespeare. But obviously there are new ideas out there, but
Yeah.
any story you can point to, oh, well, this is from this and this is from this. I mean, every single story. So there's only so much originality you can do.
Yeah. But you just got to put your own spin on it. And when you're putting your Frankenstein monster together in your story, make sure that you're just taking tiny little pieces from things and adding everything you can from your own brain and heart. Which sounded so Frankenstein too. Anyway, go ahead.
So when you're trying to write a story, you also have players that are trying to do their own thing a lot of
such a
times,
good
right?
You mean
segue.
destroy
So-
the story?
Well, yeah, exactly. You
Yeah.
have this open world. You try to have this open world, and you put out hooks out there. You put this out there, and they don't go for anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So at what point do you railroad them into something
You don't.
versus you just let it be wide open?
I have
Yeah.
a great example of this in our podcast.
What did I do?
I spent the first
Oh, I did actually.
Yeah.
Do it. I did actually do it.
I spent like the first like 40 or so episodes building up to what the main story would be, right? And
No, tell them a little bit. We were
I'm gonna sit down.
No,
Yeah.
please sit down.
No. You have to stand for
There
this.
were 10 gods. There were 10 gods in Joey's world building that ruled over this planet.
The idea was the world was thrown out of balance because a lot of the gods were dead at this point. And so the players ended up in this position where I was sort of building to where they would help the few remaining gods resurrect the dead ones.
Can I tell them what I did?
Please.
I said, why should we bring 7 gods back to life when we can just kill the other 3? And we did. We did. Joey spent, I don't even know how many months. He spent so many months down to the last.
Placing all of these pieces.
It would have been brilliant.
And I had all of these reveals set up. And it was one of those moments where you just tear up your notes and you're like, well, new story. All right, we're killing the gods.
This is what Joey did. So here's me. I was like, you guys, I have a great idea. Let's kill the gods. And Joey, he just blanched and he went.
What made it worse is it made sense for her to say it. Like she was like, well, these gods have been kind of awful. We could just kill the last 3. That will restore balance too. And the rest of the group was like, huh.
And then they went, huh. And then Joey said, and we're done with this episode.
Yep.
See you next week.
Yeah. So I personally, and I will say it so many times, your players are your main characters. Say it with me. Your players are your main characters.
Very good.
If they choose that they want a different story, that's the story you're telling.
Which is so funny because if you're and I think you said that there was a stream question. Oh, I have to finish my thought first? Okay. When you're a writer, you have plotters, you have discovery writers, aka pansters, then you've got somewhere in between. Sometimes the characters take control of your story. Like even the most rigid plotters sometimes are writing, and then sometimes the character does something where they're like, oh, this wasn't plotted before. And it's a little bit harder for a writer to then sit back and say, do I let this happen? Or do I stick to
where are you on that?
Oh, I'm 1000% a panster.
Okay,
yeah.
So you just let it go.
No, my characters write my story. I can sort of tell though if I start to write myself into a corner. I actually don't believe that there's any such thing as writer's block. Again, don't at me. I truly believe that if you have writer's block, you need to go look at the last chapter or 2, because I genuinely think all it means is that you wrote yourself into a corner and you just need to take another step or 2 back. And in almost every instance, I can tell if my characters are taking me down like a dark alley where like I'm not going to be able to return from. Sure. But it is interesting. Like you have to go with the flow. I kind of have to stop and take a moment and say, is this right for the story? Or is it because I'm sleep deprived and shouldn't have had that second glass of wine?
I have another question on
right?
this.
Drunk, edit, sober.
Well,
take that, you aspiring writers.
I have another question on this, but we'll take the question before we both forget.
Yeah. All right. So the stream question is from PlasmaChan01.
Cool name.
It kind of goes back because it was asked a while back when you were talking about kind of creating a world specifically with characters in mind and running that session 0. It's what happens when you create a world without a party in mind, and how do you keep yourself in check kind of once those players start getting added to it? I'm paraphrasing the question, but it's basically when you're creating a world without a party in mind, how do you check yourself?
If you don't know your party, my advice would be to start small. Start them in a little corner of the world where they don't need to know about the geopolitics and the big over religion themes. It's
almost like, to be an effective DM, you can't really be a plotter. You kind of have to be a plotster.
Which is a shame.
You kind of have to be a plotster. You have to learn to sort of go by the seat of your pants and let your characters kill your gods.
I've learned that lesson the hard way because I am 1,000% a plotter.
Yes.
And so I plot these big, grand schemes and watch my players destroy everything I love. And I love it. And I love it because if I wanted to tell a story, I'd write a book. But I want to tell a story with friends. I want to watch the
Writers
world.
don't have friends.
Right. I want to watch the world.
Burn?
Well, the players certainly do. Unravel is the word I was going to say.
Yeah. That
Yeah.
makes so much sense, though.
Yes.
That makes so much sense. Leaving room for the chaos that that your players
Yes.
will imbue.
Inevitably.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
This kind of piggybacks back on the stream question. So sometimes you get so into creating a particular world that not only do you get really into that, but you get into creating a particular part of that world.
Yeah.
And you really like to, for me, it's easy to get bogged down into like very minute details of it. And it's kind of at the detriment of creating everything else, which you would eventually have to get to at a certain point. So the question I would have is what do you do to, I guess, kind of check yourself to not get so bogged down to the point where you're talking about like how grain prices affect like a village down there.
Oh,
Like that. Yeah.
you are a plotter.
Yeah.
You're a
Yeah,
plotter.
we have a
Yeah.
real
I
plotter.
feel
Yeah,
you, man.
big time.
I feel you.
Yeah.
Generally, I try to just do the big picture
Do
stuff.
we need to yell boobs again? They're having way
Yes.
too much fun.
Uh-oh.
Shall we? Let's add a little bit more artistic finesse to this. Let's shout nipples this time. 1, 2, 3. Take
Thank you
that.
for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Does nipples answer your question?
Nipples is the answer to every question.
You know
I
what?
do.
That's
I
great.
do.
That's a good
I did
idea.
mention I write romantasies sometimes, right?
I have the curse/blessing of having players that will ask me those questions of how does the economy affect, and so I've gotten really good at bullshitting on the spot and
So
taking notes of everything I say. Yes. You
Yeah.
have to be flexible.
you have to be a politician.
Yeah.
Oh, well, the answer to that is something completely unrelated. Oh, look, shiny.
Right. Or just give them an answer so boring that they won't ask more questions. But
Yeah.
I think there's a point where you get to know your players and you know what they'll ask and what they don't give a shit about, right? If you're talking about why the prices of fish are inflated in this, like, you might care, but remember your players are your main characters.
Yeah.
Just write that on the top of your notes.
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, how do you deal with overworld building? Like, where you're spending so much time building your world that you're not actually doing anything else, like writing the story.
Yeah, I feel that one too.
My stories are very character driven. Like the plot's very important to me. But I find more fun in the interaction and the dialogue and the magic and the societies. Like, I personally don't get too caught up in the world building, but I have read books where the author very clearly did. And like, those books, and I'm not going to mention those books, but it's where like you spend half a page talking about like what a door looks like. Not some big grandiose door that's like, portal into another realm, but like a door. Right?
I read that book.
Yeah.
We've all read that book. And then we all set that book down and picked it back up and set it back down and picked it back up. Or in my case, just was like, I life is too short,
Yeah.
So there's definitely like, there is some self-accountability. Like sometimes you just need to say, I'm gonna put in the doorway and I'm gonna move on now.
Right. Yeah.
I think this is one of those.
You
instances.
answered it perfectly.
Yeah.
You just have to tell yourself no, and just write the important parts.
Bad DM.
Yeah. That takes discipline.
So I'm gonna go backwards a little bit here.
Are you gonna turn around?
Yes, actually, I will. So going back to like the taking your world and adapting it into a book, because I feel like I have over the last 6 years, I've been playing with the same players for the last 6 years, building this world, and I feel like I've done a really good job of like background building the history that don't involve the players in any capacity. Like they know they've learned the history, they've sought out the history, but it hasn't involved them. And one of the things that I wanted to do was I wanted to take this world, world that I've been building over the last 6 years, and I kind of wanted to adapt it into a book.
This
And,
is
like,
very
I don't
common.
even like,
So
I don't even know where to
many,
start.
Many fantasy authors were DMs and vice versa too.
famously, Patrick Rothfuss.
Yeah, we can all. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
His Name of the Wind is based on his character that he played in D&D.
So I think your question is like, how do you parse that into a book? Correct? Yeah, I mean, you've written your outline, my friend. Like in a way, from there, you just got to write your screenplay. I mean, if you think about it that way, you have your outline, you have your plot, you have a beginning, middle, and end.
You maybe have your main characters.
Yeah.
If you want it to be about
at
your
at
cast.
that point, you just have to maybe parse it down into bullet points, right? So it's not quite so overwhelming. And I guess what I would do is I would break it down by it's not called an episode when people aren't actually doing podcasts. What's it called? Session. Thank you. DM noob or D&D noob. Anyway, you parse it down by session, right? What were like the 3 or 4 bullet points from that session, and you've got a plot now. Then you do what any fantasy author or any author in general would do. You put in dialogue, you start adding some sinew and muscle and skin to that skeleton, and you've got a book.
Yeah.
And you've got your Frankenstein. Yeah. So I mean, a lot of authors never even get to the point of plotting a book, or I should say, like, aspiring authors. You've done the hardest part. Have fun. You, sir.
Hello.
We don't take questions from you. I'm sorry.
I have to go sit back down now
Yeah,
and take more
please,
pictures
please,
instead.
yeah.
Okay.
We
Loved,
know this
loved Tana the
guy.
Tiefling, awesome character. Loved when we went and killed the god. That was a lot of fun. Anyway, I do have a question for you, Joey, and for all the DMs in the room. Maybe I have seen this personally sitting at the table where you have players who've decided that they want to be antagonistic to the world that you've built and basically try to test the limits and the corners that you've created. How do you put those characters and those main characters back on track and keep your players sort of going in the right direction without railroading them? I know you've answered this question sort of in another way, but
Yeah.
that can become a real serious problem if they start kind of pushing and being competitive with you as the storyteller.
Well, maybe after.
Not legally. I'm contractually obligated to answer
Yes,
it.
that's true.
So, I think if they are purposefully being antagonistic to you, that's a conversation to have not at the table, just one-on-one, and try to understand where that's coming from. If they continue to be antagonistic and purposefully trying to derail the campaign, specifically just because they want to derail the campaign.
Remember that door we were talking about before?
There is a point where, for the greater good of the group, not every player is for every group. Not every DM is for every group, and you kind of have to address that. That can be a really sticky situation, especially if you're friends with the person, right? If
They have an
what?
emotional support tentacle monster.
Yes,
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I couldn't
Yeah.
kick her out, unfortunately. She knows where I live.
That's true. Thanks for the question.
Yeah.
Hello. So I have a question for kind of both of you, and I think there's going to be 2 different trains of thought. But if you have NPCs or side characters and you just end up with basically a full ensemble where you're sitting there having to deal with 20 different voices, how do you condense without necessarily killing your player's heart because you got rid of their favorite?
That's a great question.
I mean, same thing for authors, but like,
I mean, yeah,
side
my
character.
I do have audiobook narrators, right, where we have to talk about that.
Do you want to answer that?
No, I mean, not really. I just get audiobook. I mean, that's what they're paid to do, right? DMs aren't paid to,
Right, but you
to do that.
But you can get to the point where you have so many characters it clogs things up, right?
That's when you just do, like fireball,
Right,
right?
right. So that's true. I guess I can't argue with that.
There were so many fireballs in our campaign.
It
worked.
That takes practice, right? Knowing where your limit is as a DM. Of sometimes instead of introducing a new character, it's, oh hey, that character is here. That character you already know is here, and they have a reason to be here. And now you don't have to come up with another voice, which is my least favorite part of DMing.
Or sometimes it's time for that character now to go
Right.
on their own side quest.
Right.
Farewell, character who was
Mhm.
hard on my voice and I wasn't very good at the accent.
Right.
See you next year, maybe.
How do you start a campaign? I just started one of mine, and I like had my players wake up in a random field. Like I have no
That's great.
idea actually how to make an interesting start to a campaign. And this is a question for you as well. How do you
Yeah.
start a book? I don't know how to like actually open it.
Starting
effectively.
is the hardest part.
Yeah.
It's hard.
Joey started our campaign by killing all of us. Literally started with a TPK in the first.
I started with
10
them in the
seconds.
underworld.
We
Yeah,
were all
they
dead.
died.
It was beautiful.
It was a
really
really
nice.
fun way. Thank you.
Yeah.
You, unless you're crazy, I don't know where he left.
He's right there.
Hello.
Yeah.
You want to start small usually. When you have a bunch of level 1, 2 players and you introduce the big bad, they don't have a reason to fight the big bad. There's just nothing they can do. Start small. Start with bandit stuff. And build up to the big bad.
That's funny. So writing, people don't realize this, or maybe some people do, but writing is trends change, right? For a very long time, every book started with an alarm clock and someone waking up. You still see that in movies. Movies really need to move away from that. But if you're an author, you are now lambasted. If your character wakes up from a dream, from an alarm clock, you can't do that anymore. The trend right now is to basically just start in the middle of a scene, sometimes in the middle of an action scene. Sometimes you just drop them right in the middle of battle and then you bring it back. One of my books, it literally starts with the rotund, jiggling butt cheek jerked and wriggled beneath my fingers, eliciting an exasperated sigh from me, the illustrious tattoo artist that was it was a butt cobra. So like it started with an ass. So that's definitely, you can start with an ass in your campaign too. Don't look jealous.
Whose ass?
A big motorcycle guy. He was getting a snake tattooed on his butt.
Well, good for him.
First chapter called Butt Cobras. We have like 3 more minutes. So yeah, hopefully we can try and get both of your
We're gonna
questions in there.
shotgun these 2 questions.
So my question is more about DMing and like letting new players. One of my favorite things to do in all my campaigns is to let my players explain the world and how they fit into
I
it
love that.
in
Yeah.
certain actions and moments. Especially Nat 20 is my favorite way to like get them into the story. How do you limit that interaction to your own world? Because like obviously as a DM, you spend a lot of time creating the world. You don't want the player to come in and be like, change it all up because they rolled a nat 20. So how do you draw the line of like letting them have fun with it, but stopping it before they get too crazy with it?
Almost always my answer is your players are your main characters.
Yeah.
If there's something logical they say about your setting, well, guess what? It's canon. We're rolling
Yeah.
with it. There's a line though. I mean, if they're trolling you, there's a point where you say, well, not actually. But usually my advice would be you roll with it. You let them write the story with you. Because as DM, you're just the narrator, right? This is their story. So that's my advice.
I love that.
Is that line, you'll know. I mean, you'll know. If it completely throws everything off, then maybe you say, well, but otherwise you say, yep, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey.
That made me. I'm sorry. There was the scene between Chris Pratt and oh my God, Thor guy.
Yeah.
And they're trying to decide who's the captain of the ship, and you know,
Yeah.
Chris Hemsworth is sort of like, but actually,
Yeah.
like I kind of envision
Yes.
you as a DM
This-
saying that, but not really,
Right.
You know,
Right. Or they think that, but it's a lie. Right? They
Sure.
were misinformed.
whatever you want.
I love your armor.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
I love your armor.
Well, thank you. Let's fight.
So, first time DM, led my first session
Yeah.
last weekend.
Oh yeah, man.
It's thank you.
Yeah.
But it's me, my girlfriend, and my 10-year-old son. Neither of them have ever played. Right. So I know I'm doing blasphemous
Yeah.
things. I cut out some characters, I cut out some spells, try to
Sure.
keep it very simple for
Yeah.
the kid.
Smart.
What are the things that you would consider essential to keep it D&D versus what things should I cut out to make it more accessible for a 10-year-old who's never seen it?
Oh, probably like
Wow.
what we did for the podcast.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
there. You know your son, right? So
I've met him.
yeah, hopefully you know
He's
your
all
son,
right, yeah.
right? I think
Thank you.
character building is the most rules intensive part of playing D&D. And so I think there's a point where you know, hopefully if your son wants to play a spellcaster, it's a bit harder of like, okay, what's the easiest spellcaster we can do here? And have you played D&D before?
Yeah, but I've only done like half a dozen sessions.
Okay. That's a lot.
So it feels like maybe like easing back on the rules a little bit and not worrying about whether he does it. Basically treating him like Joey treated me, right?
Like a child.
Like a child. Easing back on the rules and
I learned that the cops won't arrest you if you break D&D rules.
Yeah, that's true.
And so just who cares?
Make sure he's having fun.
Yeah, just have fun. I'm talking about rules a lot because it's something that players expect, but you can break them. Who cares?
We got the big red time's up sign.
Oh,
so
no.
two things. One, seriously, guys, thank you so much for being here. We know that you had it's like a United Airlines commercial. We know you had many different panels to choose from. We so appreciate you choosing ours. Get your luggage and get the fuck out. But second thing, and far more important, on the count of three, we're going to yell nutsack. 1, 2, 3. All night. Joey and I will stick around for a few minutes. Take care. Be good to each other.